Welcome to the chaos sector. We return to the Matrix. Well, Harris apparently had someone reboot her system and give her the courage to take on the biggest adversarial media source for Democrats. She decided to jump off the cliff, hoping to land on a huge bed of marshmallows. Unfortunately, what appears to be marshmallows was actually slabs of concrete. And for the first time, we observed the whimsical, blissfully detached Harris show real anger. Yep, Fox News will pull it out of you, and you better be prepared to deal with their attacks. I give her a bit of credit for having the courage to appear on Fox News. Should have done that earlier, though. You see, if she had done that interview earlier in the campaign, she could have gotten the tougher interviews out of the way, had a few intermediate interviews in the middle, and coast at the end. And it would have also improved her image. Instead of having rallies with Megan Thee Stallion rapping about sex and money to potential voters. That was a very big mistake by the Harris campaign, as it showed a lack of focus, a lack of sophistication, especially a female presidential candidate. And ultimately, it is how Harris decided to relay a message to potential voters. Megan Thee Stallion didn't create a rap song for Harris, which would have been quite the compliment and inspirational. Negative. She decided to perform one of her raunchy rap songs that was completely irrelevant to the very reason she was there, for a political rally. So, everything Harris and her campaign did prior created an image of being whimsical, a state of bliss, oblivious to the importance of what job she is attempting to land. Now, after so many failed interviews, even from her allies, Harris wants to sit down with her biggest challenge? It's too late. You might as well get your swimming goggles. You're already underwater. It was an attempt to show her toughness, show how she can take on the right-wing network of Fox News. Once again, she should have done this earlier, like in August or September. It's always beneficial for one side to be challenged by the opposition, and surely she gets at least experience points. But it comes back to the major problem that Harris can't fix, and that's her policies. News outlets depicted it as a testy interview, or fierce interview on Fox News, or feisty interview filled with combative exchanges and interruptions. Well, Bayer wasn't actually that combative. More so, he wanted to focus on her record, what she has stated, what she has proposed, her vice presidency, and what her policies are going forward as the presidential candidate. There were a few interruptions from Bayer, but it was blown out of proportion. Let's review a bit of it. Quote, Kamala Harris repeatedly pivots to Trump when grilled on immigration record. In Fox News interview, Vice President Kamala Harris repeatedly dodged several questions about her administration's immigration record, and instead pivot to former President Trump during an interview with Fox News' Bret Baier. Baier began the interview Wednesday by asking Harris how many illegal immigrants were released by the Biden administration into the country. She responded, quote, well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about, unquote. Now this is when Baier interjected, quote, but just a number. Do you think it's 1 million? 3 million? Harris responded, quote, Brett, let's just get to the point, okay? The point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired, unquote. Now, the question was a strategic trap set for Harris. And of course, she knew it was a lose-lose situation. So, of course, she shuffled her feet away from it. But because it is a question by the interviewer, he is expecting an answer for it, not blabbering. Let me explain a bit more. Kamala Harris was, and is still currently the border czar. Under this administration and her supervision, along with Mayorkas, there have been millions of illegal immigrants who have entered the United States. They have committed some of the most gruesome crimes, among the fact that they have invaded many communities across the country. If Harris acknowledges there have been millions of illegal immigrants who have entered the country, she is held accountable as the assigned border czar. If she deflects from the question, such as she did, well, she's held accountable but is avoiding that accountability, which hurts her credibility even more. So it was a strategic trap set by Baier, but that trap wouldn't exist if Harris enforced the law. You see? Now, from the beginning of the interview, she faced a question she has to deviate from because she is predominantly responsible for the crisis. Of course, you have Old Joe and the Department of Homeland Security. But Harris's job was to basically oversee operations at the border, check in with Border Patrol weekly, heck, even daily, to obtain intel on what are the trends, what are the percentages, what are the demographics, who are the bad actors, who are the victims, who are the drug smugglers, who are the human traffickers, follow the money trail. This is your job, get the information, and solve the issue, plain and simple. And since she likes to brag about being a district attorney and prosecutor who went after transnational gangs and such, take that same fierce approach to crime and apply it to the criminal activity at the border. But she didn't. So what position does she have here? One that was complicit with allowing those illegal immigrants to enter the country, and that, my friends, by law, is a breach of national security. Let's continue. Quote, after Bayer invoked, DHS estimated that 6 million illegal immigrants had been released into the country. He then pressed her about the Biden administration's decision to reverse Trump-era policies like remain in Mexico, and how that decision is linked to the release of violent criminals. Bayer states, quote, so looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration? Harris responded by highlighting the Biden administration's first legislative push, which was immigration reform, and accused Trump of killing a bipartisan immigration bill. Again, this is basically an act of treason, if you think about it. Just because Mexico are neighbors to the United States does not mean the U.S. government isn't guilty of treason by allowing an invasion of illegal immigrants who are depicted as simply being hardworking people. Not all of the illegal immigrants are violent, but it's about the law. And if a government violates their own law in favor of another nation's citizens' interests, this is actually treason. The special report anchor then turned to the high-profile murders of Jocelyn Nungary, Rachel Morin, and Laken Riley, all victims at the hands of violent illegal immigrants who entered the country during the Biden administration. Bayer then asked, quote, this is a specific policy decision by your administration to release these men into the country. So, what I'm saying to you, do you owe those families an apology? Unquote. Harris responds, quote, let me just say, first of all, those are tragic cases. There's no question about that. There's no question about that. And I can't imagine the pain that the families of those victims have experienced for a loss that should not have occurred. So that is true. Wait, what the hell? What is true? What is she referring to that's true? Your own statements? Are you saying it's true that those illegal immigrants shouldn't have been in the country? What exactly is true here you're acknowledging? Keep this at the forefront, my friends, because this is actually an admission of guilt. But you see, it took being confronted about those murders for her to indirectly hold herself accountable for it. To be honest, the rest of the interview is arbitrary now. She admitted the administration is responsible for all of the illegal immigrants committing these crimes. Okay, we can end the interview. Cut. But let's continue. Quote, it is also true that if the border security bill had actually been passed 9 months ago, it would be 9 months that we would have had more border agents at the border. More support for the folks who are working around the clock, trying to hold it all together to ensure that no future harm would occur. Unquote. Wow, that is the biggest load of filth she has ever blabbered out. Do you know what Harris is saying here? Do you? She is basically blaming Donald Trump for the murders of those females by having influence on Congress to reject the border security bill. That is fucking disgusting. We mentioned Harris is the type of person who would blackmail someone to wiggle her way out of trouble. And we see here trying to frame Donald Trump for being responsible for the illegal immigrants that murdered those females when it happened in her administration due to her administration's immigration policies. Once again, women need to take heed to this because it's something also that is important. Harris being too busy blabbering about a woman's right to abort children not only is advocating for that, but is also allowing women and young girls to be raped, assaulted, and murdered by illegal immigrants, goes to show that she doesn't truly care about women's rights. Again, Bayer put Harris in a corner, and she can't get out of it, no matter what rhetoric she spews out there. She mentioned the border security bill, but you notice she didn't say that if it were passed, those young females would still be alive, because those individuals were already in the country, which this administration allowed to cross the border illegally to commit those murders. Again, transparency and honesty. Harris could have responded in just saying something like, I am so sorry we messed up, and I have to live with the decisions we made every day. I was assigned to do a job. There were things I was notified about that made sense at the time. Some things didn't make sense. But when you're dealing with such a massive issue such as immigration, it's very difficult to toe the line without having curbs. I hold myself accountable. Our administration tried to help those who were in need, and it became overwhelming. If I can go back, I would say to others, this isn't the best plan, but it's only so much I can do, Brett. But as I sit here in this interview, in front of the American people, in front of those families, I am deeply sorry for our mistakes. Now, that would have helped her tremendously. Although pessimists will still blast her, at least there's courage to hold yourself accountable. You see, this is what really pisses us off about Kamala Harris. Not only is she lacking self-accountability, but she compounds that problem by placing the blame on others. It gives off a spoiled and entitled persona where nothing is her fault. The blame falls on someone else. You cannot have a leader such as this because everything will be blamed on everyone else, except the commander-in-chief. And I think the American people have gotten a full glass of bullshit by now. And all they see is an entitled, spoiled San Francisco liberal who blames others for her mistakes. I'm done.
Even more so, Harris is actually disregarding those families as well, when you break it down. Bayer asked if she thinks this administration owes those families an apology, right? Instead of just apologizing, she turned into Houdini and vanished into thin air. She gave her condolences, but never apologized, which obviously holds accountability. Even from the dynamic of just being honorable, just apologize out of respect. She avoided that. But the biggest disrespect to the families is how she tries to suggest it is Donald Trump who should be apologizing to the families. Unbelievable. It's a new low for Harris. How dare she try to put the blame on someone else when he wasn't in charge? He didn't leave the borders wide open. He didn't literally fly migrants into the country by the hundreds of thousands. They reversed Trump's Remain in Mexico executive order. They terminated the construction of the border wall. They have been accommodating migrants, legal and illegal. This administration actually put illegal immigrants on the United States Census. I mean, they put the country at high risk of the very dangers and violence being discussed in the interview. Sure, there are crimes that are committed by citizens, but you don't add fuel to the fire unless you want to burn something down, you see? And that's what they literally did. Reversing Remain in Mexico executive order, halting the construction of the border wall, flying them in, placing them on the United States Census. I mean, if you're violating the laws, then you are enabling, or shall I say complicit, with what criminal activity comes with it. But you see, this is what Democrats get, karma. Now Harris is on an island by herself, forced to answer tough questions, and decides to point the finger at someone else for her tragic failures. What trifling person she is, that is unacceptable, and off that alone, if she is elected president, the United States is doomed. It's about character, and Harris doesn't have the courage to hold herself accountable. Just fucking admit you are responsible by way of the policies you supported and enforced, and walk away with some glimpse of dignity. But see, this is her character, and how she blames others for her mistakes. She's like a child, you know? Let's continue, though. Bayer then states, quote, Madam Vice President, it was a policy decision in the early part of your administration. Bayer later pressed before turning to a testimony from Jocelyn Nungari's mother, who said the Biden-Harris administration was responsible for her daughter's murder. Quote, so do you owe them an apology, is what I'm saying? Bayer again asked. Harris responded, quote, I will tell you that I'm sorry for her loss. I'm so sorry for her loss. Sincerely. Okay, now that's an apology. But the problem here is it's an apology detached of responsibility and accountability. Because Harris is not admitting that the administration made a mistake in allowing illegal immigrants into the country, which led to Jocelyn Nungari's death. It is the immigration policy that led to these murders and other crimes, such as drug trafficking, human trafficking, and sex trafficking. She can't actually say the administration failed Jocelyn Nungari, failed Laken Riley, failed Rachel Morin, and failed other victims of crimes committed by illegal immigrants. And even more disturbing is that many of those criminals were arrested and then released back into the country, such as in sanctuary cities. In San Francisco, no surprise here, Juan Francisco Lopez was an illegal immigrant and had 7 felony convictions in the United States. He had been deported from the country 5 times. Yet the city of San Francisco, which the mayor is another Democrat in Ed Lee, declined to detain him for ICE, and officials released him into the community. In July of 2015, Lopez was charged with murdering Katie Steinle in San Francisco. Now this man was not, I repeat, was not charged with second-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter, because the story he told was that he found a firearm and accidentally shot Steinle in the head. He simply lied. The courts believed him. Although he was an illegal immigrant with 7 fucking felonies, had continued to cross the border illegally and ended up taking someone's life. But see, these type of crimes occur mainly in these sanctuary cities because local law enforcement does not hand them over to ICE, which only creates extremely dangerous environments for residents in the communities. But guess who is responsible for these tragic cases? The Biden-Harris administration. And she is guilty as charged, being confronted in the interview about her crimes. Let's continue. Quote, but let's talk about what is happening right now with an individual who does not want to participate in solutions. Let's talk about that as well. In all fairness, I told you I feel awful for what she and her family have experienced. Unquote. I'm appalled. This is out of control. Harris and old Joe need to be impeached right now, and she should be disqualified from running for president of the United States. Do you see how dismissive she was in regards to those tragedies? I'm sorry for their loss, but let's talk about Donald Trump instead. He is the real problem here, not our administration. The audacity of this person to sit there and turn her nose up at her own fucking responsibility. It's sickening. Does everyone truly grasp how inhumane Harris is? She doesn't care about anyone but herself and the people around her, who she would backstab at any moment anyway. Oh boy, it's surreal, right? How does this person even qualify to run for president? Kamala Harris, she not only be impeached along with old Joe, but they both should be brought up on a slew of criminal charges. Crimes against humanity, treason, violating immigration laws, violating the United States Constitution, harboring criminals, harboring drug traffickers, harboring human traffickers, harboring sex traffickers, obstruction of justice, and other crimes I can't think of at this moment. I mean, they are literally convicted criminals in the White House at this very moment. And one of them, somehow, is running for president? Fucking insanity. Let's try to finish. Bayer then asked, quote, "You said repeatedly that the border was secure. When in your mind, when did it start becoming a crisis?" Bayer then asked, quote, "I think we all know that it needs to be fixed. I was just down at the border talking with border agents. We need more judges. We need to process those cases faster. We need the support for cases that should be prosecuted. They need more resources, and Congress, ultimately, is the only place that's going to get fixed, Brett. That's how this system works." Unquote. Okay, this is atrocious. She needs to be impeached at this very moment. She shouldn't be given the opportunity to even run for president. Disqualification. She blames Trump. She blames Congress. She claims more judges are needed. No, what's needed is a border czar who will do the job assigned to them, instead of prancing around on TikTok, while families are devastated by tragedies caused by this administration's immigration policies. This interview is the worst, as many expected it to be. Bayer jumped out the gate with a tough question, and it was no contest from that point on. Harris even became angry, as she rambled on and on about Trump. Trump this, Trump that, he's unfit, he's dangerous. He's a threat to democracy. Nobody is falling for that anymore. That rhetoric is outdated and played out, Ms. Harris. Now it sounds like some sort of plea bargain, begging the American people not to vote for Trump. We've stated this time and time again. Democrats spent so much time obsessing over Trump that they forgot that they had candidates to run for president. After Hillary Clinton lost, they went into a tailspin. No direction, no cohesiveness, no sense of purpose, other than to attach themselves to Trump. And Harris is the result of not having qualified candidates compete. It's one of the most pathetic cases I've ever seen. CTOD, compulsive Trump obsession disorder. Every question by Bayer about this administration, and Harris specifically, somehow ended up being a debate about Trump. For example, Bayer asked her about turning the page and a candidate for change and all. He asked her, "You've been the vice president for the last 3.5 years. Where are you turning the page from?" And Harris stated that, quote, "And Donald Trump has been running for office for years, blah, blah, blah." Bayer responded in saying, quote, "But you've been the one holding office." And then she stated, quote, "You and I both know what I'm talking about," unquote. And Bayer responded in saying, quote, "I actually don't. What are you talking about?" unquote. Every point of contention of holding Harris accountable for her record, vice presidency, the administration's failures, and her presidential proposals led right back to Harris talking about her opponent. If you aren't going to answer the questions about your record, vice presidency, the administration's failures, and your presidential proposals, then why even have the interview? And she mentioned legislation in 2021 regarding immigration as some sort of attempt at fixing the problem. It was actually more about providing amnesty to migrants, including illegal immigrants, which Democrats rejected in Congress. In fact, let's touch on that briefly. Amnesty is a gateway to increasing the amount of migrants, including illegal immigrants primarily, into sanctuary cities and states. By law, it forgives certain classes of people who were subject to trial for crimes that they had not yet been convicted for. And this law generates a pipeline of migration directly to sanctuary cities and states. California, Colorado, Connecticut, Illinois, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, Washington, and Washington, D.C. are all sanctuary states. And these are some of the most dysfunctional environments due to mass immigration into hundreds of cities in those states. California, of course, just a savage wasteland. Colorado is currently being overrun by Venezuelan gangs. Illinois has also seen an invasion of those gangs. New York is the Empire City. Yeah, an empire of illegal immigrants that drove Eric Adams into an indictment. Oregon is perhaps the most unfathomable, legalizing crack cocaine and other hard drugs. The list goes on. And this is what Kamala Harris and this administration advocated for. You have members in Congress fighting to reshape communities all across the country into third world savage lands. But here's the thing, they don't have to live in those communities, you see. Even immigrants that have legally been processed, Hispanic Americans and Mexican Americans, are complaining about illegal immigration. Many of their youth, primarily their daughters, have been victims of sexual assault, rape, murder, and pregnancies due to those violations. Many of their sons have been harmed as well, including murder and also rape. A savage cultural practice by many of those illegal immigrants has terrorized many communities across the board, and this administration ignited more of this by providing temporary protection status to these individuals to roam around freely in society. Oh, but you know, Harris isn't taking any responsibility for this madness. It's Trump's fault. But you may ask, why are they so obsessed with Trump? One word, racism. That's why Obama is having a nervous breakdown trying to get black men to vote for Harris. If they vote for Trump, racism is in question. That's why the Harris campaign is trying to court Hispanic voters. If they vote for Trump, racism is in question. This is why they have been obsessed with Trump. They literally tried to assassinate this man to protect the truth about racism. Think about how desperate Democrats are. It's out of this world insanity.
Yeah, they're at the end of the road. I want to reiterate a bit about this interview because it's so astonishing. Many are chalking it up to just Harris being stumped by Fox News. It's deeper than that, as we broke down. Harris blamed Trump for murders illegal immigrants committed, and that's what stuck out to me. Not only is she spitting in the faces of those families, by associating Trump to the issue, it is also spitting in the face of the victims as well. Yes, because if you don't have the guts to admit that you were wrong, or decisions you made or agreed to contributed to someone's death, then you are, well, you're a piece of shit. That's just the facts. Think about it. Harris is more concerned about her image, which she can't save face anyway regarding the issue, but she is more concerned about her image than to admit the policies of this administration contributed to violent crimes and murders of citizens in the country. We've said it before, power is not for everyone. Kamala Harris has been seeking the pinnacle of power ever since she entered the political realm. And she has proven that she will stop at nothing and will disregard all morality and dignity to get it. Some may say, wait, you're describing Donald Trump. To a certain degree, all politicians have some degree of that narcissism. But Kamala Harris, my friends, is a very dangerous individual. Mind you, her background is, shall we say, anti-American. Her father was a Marxist, which is essentially communism. If you've noticed, Harris hasn't been asked about these views her father shared, right? The left-wing media definitely wouldn't do it, and here's why. Marxism is a political and economic theory that aims to create a classless society where everyone works for the common good. The theory advocates for a society that has no classes, such as lower, middle, and upper class. Every person within the society works for the common good, and class struggle is theoretically gone. Its theory suggests that capitalism is broken up into two classes, workers and capitalists. Those that control the corporations, being the capitalists, exploit the workers. But with Marxism, the goal is to have the workers rise to a level that makes everyone even, eliminating classes. Now, doesn't this sound familiar? We've heard the statements, such as, oh, everyone doesn't start off at the same place, so we need to help those individuals have a better chance of reaching the American dream. That's what Kamala Harris frequently states. Equity, DEI ideology, is stemming from a machination of all of the anti-capital philosophy. Of course it fails, because pursuing a society where everyone is on the same level, then who makes decisions about trade? Who makes decisions about laws? Who makes decisions about education? Who makes decisions about goods? The point, there has to be a leader, and that leader, from an economic view, is a system of capitalism. It fails because the very philosophers that advocated for it were in essence leaders, or teachers. But in a Marxist society, no one is above the other, so therefore, nobody should be able to teach or guide anyone else. Sounds a bit silly, but if there are no corporations or capitalists and everyone fights for the common good, then who determines how this socio-economic structure is carried out? There has to be structure, and when you have structure, you have people appointed to positions that carry out the laws and, you know what, it's retarded. What if someone wants to go into business for themselves and their family, they have a good they would like to offer their fellow citizens? Well, they are the business owner, and obviously they need workers, so that person has just resurrected capitalism, you see? What about education? It's all nonsense. And what does it actually mean by workers rising to a level where everyone is equal? Being paid the same wage? Having the same positions at a company? Then how the fuck do you have a company then? A company wouldn't exist because there is not a source of hierarchy where people make decisions about the company. Well, I guess that's what Karl Marx wanted. Entities that weren't companies. Just, I don't know, people working somewhere and getting paid high wages equally. Not sure what to call it. Oh wait, it's called insanity because Karl Marx was sniffing paint thinner at the time. Socialism, communism, Marxism, all of this is mashed up into Kamala Harris's brain. Is it a coincidence that Kamala Harris's running mate is Tim Walz, who has visited China so much, you'd think he had an overseas business, right? Who visits China so many times, without just moving there. Perhaps an overseas mistress can't resist the temptation of those Chinese spies, hey? Because Tim Walz is in fact a covert communist operative for the Chinese Communist Party. He was chosen by Harris to be the perfect storm of an ideological conglomerate, that being socialism, communism, and Marxism. You have the progressives with socialism, you have Tim Walz with communism, and Kamala Harris with Marxism. It's a theory, but I tell you what, all of the pieces align with each component, right? There is definitely treason being carried out, floating around in US politics.
I'll tell you what, that makes a lot of sense to me. Socialist in Congress, a communist who was a governor in a state, and a Marxist aiming to turn the country upside down and eyeing the most powerful seat in government. Also, you have to factor Van Jones into this equation as well, because he is in fact a communist. Many may forget this when they listen to him speak, because he doesn't speak about his communist views. He may be a key factor if the Harris-Walz ticket gained power. We have to keep in mind, there is a faction of the Progressive Party called the Democratic Socialists of America. Some members of the squad are a part of it, while others claim they aren't. We all know they're all a part of it. This ideology indoctrinates spoiled, entitled, and lazy youth who lack ambitions, dreams, and aspirations. As Kamala Harris would say, they are often stoners, no real purpose, other than whining about how they have to work to pay for their iPhones. Bernie Sanders leads the way, with his anti-capitalism only for society, not for himself though. Then you have AOC, another wacko pushing the agenda, but not in her personal life. And Cynthia Nixon, the stuck-up bitter childless cat lady on the show Sex and the City. These wackos do not speak for the American people. Their plans are to make America like Cuba or Venezuela, or dare I say, like China. If you even rewind back to 2009 with Maxine Waters, who literally stated she wanted to socialize and take over all oil companies. Quote, and guess what this lib will be all about? This lib will be about socializing, and at this moment, she paused in her speech, stuttered a bit, realizing she slipped up, but then in her arrogance, she continued and stated she wanted to take over the oil companies. So there has been socialism in government and from politicians. But communism is something that is becoming more and more evident. We will keep pointing this out, because it's an example of how dictators in communist countries enforce laws. Tim Walz, as governor of Minnesota, signed an executive order that granted the government the power to obtain custody of children whose parents denied gender reassignment care. This is a dangerous precedent, because it gives the government the authority to just come kidnap children out of homes, because parents do not ascribe to some wacky woke transgender indoctrination. Funny how the left states the government shouldn't have the authority to tell them what to do with their bodies, but they want the government to have the authority to come kidnap children out of homes from parents? It's not even a normal case of double standard. It's beyond that, because the magnitude of the double standard is hard to comprehend in a normal person's mind. You understand? Or what about the American psycho better known as Gavin Newsom in California, raising the minimum wage for fast food workers to $20 an hour? Never mind the differences in age, experience, work experience. Oh, it doesn't matter. I'm changing the pay rate to $20 an hour. And guess what happened? That's right, huge layoffs, reduction of hours. Businesses went bankrupt, and it led to massive unemployment. Guess that was Newsom's attempt at Marxism, where workers rise to a level of being equal across the board. Let's let illegal immigrants flood the state. Never mind the drug, human, and sex trafficking that will destroy many lower-class communities. I control the state, and every city in my state will do what I say or else. So, if you're a Catholic hospital and you don't want to perform an abortion, you will be punished. You will face legal consequences for your disobedience. Your religious beliefs do not supersede a woman's right to murder a human life. And our schools are required to let drag queens have story time with the children. If you have a problem with that as a teacher, you will be fired immediately. If you are a parent who disapproves, your child will be taken from you. I will pass a law that requires our children in schools to be exposed to child pornographic novels. Maya Kobabe is an ambassador for the LGBTQ community, and she has every right to present novels about two minors performing oral sex on each other. And if you have a problem with this as a teacher, you will be fired immediately. If you are a parent who has a problem with this, your child will be taken from you, and you will be charged with child neglect and child abuse. And I will outlaw requirements for residents to present identification to cast a vote. If any city doesn't abide by this law, then those cities and mayors will be fined $500,000. Sounds unbelievable, right? But that's exactly what's happening. These are examples of what a socialist or communist country looks like. Whenever there is the enforcement of laws that force citizens to adhere to radical and immoral ideologies, or they will face consequences, is the epitome of totalitarianism. Please, you have to be wary of this threat. Totalitarianism is a political system and form of government that prohibits opposition of political parties and their views. It disregards and outlaws political claims of individual and group opposition to the state. It controls the public sphere and the private sphere of society. Totalitarianism is an extreme form of authoritarianism where all socio-political power is held by a dictator who also controls the national politics and the peoples of the nation with continual propaganda campaigns that are broadcast by state-controlled and by mass communications media. It uses ideology to control most aspects of human life, such as the political economy of the country, the system of education, the arts and sciences, and the private life morality of citizens. This is currently happening in the United States, my friends. The only difference is there isn't one dictator such as Stalin, Hitler, Castro, Chavez, and others who rule as a president. This is a collective totalitarian effort from government, corrupt bureaucrats, politicians, and dark money donors. And the faces in front are individuals such as Bernie Sanders, AOC, and Cynthia Nixon. They are the foot soldiers of totalitarianism, manipulating the youth into literal modern-day slavery. Many believe that Harris didn't pick Josh Shapiro because, well, he would make her look dumb. Although that's true, I don't think that was the reason. Like my colleague stated, I think Tim Walz was picked for the trifecta of the socialism, communism, and Marxism. Like collecting broken shards of a stone, all of the pieces have been brought together, planning to wreak havoc on the United States. They've already started. But they haven't gotten that primary source of complete control, and that's the U.S. presidency. It's evident that this administration intentionally flooded the country with illegal immigrants. So that's the first sign of changing the culture of society. And keep in mind, this is a form of treason, the crime of betraying one's country, especially by attempting to kill the sovereign or overthrow the government. These are very serious criminal charges, my friends. Violating the laws of a nation by allowing illegal immigrants into the country is an act of treason. Putting those illegal immigrants on the United States census is an act of treason because you are essentially destroying the sovereignty of citizens of the country. Overthrowing the government by weaponizing the government agencies and binding them to ideological constraints to protect crimes is an act of treason. Kamala Harris is one branch on that tree, but she is one of the most dangerous branches because of potential power she may obtain. One might say, oh, you know, one minute you state she's an airhead, then the next minute you state she's fully aware and quite intelligent in how she is slithering around. It's in the middle, actually. She has an ideology that is destructive. But at the same time, I don't think she's all that intelligent. There are idiots who follow certain beliefs and philosophies, you know. She's a prime example.
Exactly. Harris is not that smart in my opinion, but one does not have to be that smart to be destructive. Her father was a Marxist, and we all know he taught her everything he knew about Marxism. There's another form of it called post-Marxism, which came about in the 1970s. Kamala Harris is 60 years old. In the 70s, she would be about 10 years old. Perfect age to start teaching your daughter about Marxism, if that's your worldview. She went on to study political science and economics at Howard University. But I don't think that degree she obtained was warranted. I think it was due to her being a member of the sorority Alpha Kappa Alpha. As you all know, sororities and fraternities help their members with their education, such as having people take exams, and even staff members are a part of sororities and fraternities. So it's not a guarantee that she actually earned that degree. When they graduate, they are basically handed jobs on a silver platter because often those sororities and fraternities have let's just say, they have ways to make it happen. The reason I say that is because her quote, economic language sounds a bit ignorant. And if she had actually earned that degree, her language would be more direct and articulate. If not, she's doing a very clever job of masking her economic education by blabbering. But there is something that stuck out in her prior career in the judicial system. She pledged to basically outlaw the death penalty. In 2004, a San Francisco police officer was shot and killed, and Harris didn't seek the death penalty for the shooter. Tough on crime though, right? Doesn't seem like it. In 2009, an illegal immigrant and an MS-13 gang member murdered a man and his two sons. Harris didn't seek the death penalty for those criminals, rather prison sentences. Now how ironic is it that she is doing the same thing now she did back then, protecting illegal immigrants, even proposing to pay for reassignment surgery in prison. We may be completely wrong. Maybe she's carrying out her father's dreams of creating a nation ruled by Marxism, which she will be the first to usher it in. There is always a method to the madness, of course. Her madness could have been disguised as being a whimsical political airhead. Very clever, I must say. Vice President Harris, we found you out. This is the Chaos Sector.